Personal responsibility is not just a moral virtue, it is a fundamental principle that governs reality. When we talk about justice, particularly divine justice, we are not speaking of a vague cosmic force that arbitrarily punishes wrongdoers. Instead, we are referring to something deeply embedded in the structure of existence itself. The world is built on an intricate balance of order and chaos. When someone engages in deception, betrayal, or harm, they are, knowingly or unknowingly, disturbing that balance. And the thing about disturbing balance is that the world, whether through psychological, social, or even seemingly spiritual means, tends to correct itself. At the core of this correction is personal responsibility. People who do harm often believe they can escape consequences, that they can manipulate, deceive, or take advantage of others without repercussions. This belief stems from a failure to understand the inescapable nature of order. The universe, society, and even the human mind operate within a structure that rewards truth and punishes falsehood, whether immediately or over time. When someone chooses to act unethically, they are making a fundamental mistake. They are assuming that reality can be bent indefinitely in their favor. But reality does not work that way. The further someone removes themselves from truth, from honesty, from integrity, the more unstable their world becomes. This is where the concept of justice manifests. When someone causes harm, their actions set into motion a chain of events that they often cannot predict. Their lies require more lies to sustain them. Their betrayals require further deception to cover their tracks. Their manipulation alienates them from genuine connection. Slowly, without them realizing it, they begin constructing their own downfall. It may not be immediate and it may not be dramatic, but it is inevitable. They will find themselves trapped in a reality they created, one that is increasingly hostile to them. The more they avoid responsibility, the heavier the burden becomes. What about how trust operates in human relationships? Trust is a kind of invisible currency. It takes time and effort to accumulate, but it can be destroyed in an instant. A person who harms others might appear to be getting away with it at first, but trust, once broken, rarely heals completely. Over time, they will find themselves isolated, not because someone is actively punishing them, but because the very nature of social interaction requires trust. And once trust is gone, it is nearly impossible to restore. This is a form of divine justice, not necessarily in the sense of supernatural intervention, but in the sense that the structure of existence itself does not support those who live in contradiction to truth. Even at a psychological level, the burden of wrongdoing is unavoidable. The human mind is not designed to exist in a perpetual state of deception. When a person engages in harmful actions, they may suppress guilt for a time, but it does not disappear. It festers. It manifests in anxiety, paranoia, resentment, and sometimes even physical illness. The weight of knowing on some level that they have acted in opposition to truth gnaws at them. They may try to escape it through distractions, through vices, through power or wealth, but these things do not provide genuine relief. They only delay the inevitable confrontation with reality. On a broader level, this is why civilizations that abandon personal responsibility eventually collapse. Societies thrive when they are built on principles of accountability, honesty, and integrity. The moment these values erode, disorder sets in. Corruption breeds more corruption, deception leads to further instability, and eventually the entire structure falls apart. The same principle applies to individuals. A person who consistently avoids responsibility is setting themselves up for failure, not because someone else is enforcing punishment, but because reality does not sustain those who refuse to align with truth. For those who have been wronged, it is crucial to understand this. Justice is not always immediate, but it is inevitable. The desire for revenge, for direct retribution, is understandable but unnecessary. The world has mechanisms in place that ensure that those who act outside of truth eventually face the consequences of their actions. The challenge for the person who has been hurt is not to become consumed by the need to witness that justice unfold. True strength lies in recognizing that order will restore itself without your intervention. Your responsibility is to move forward, to align yourself with truth, and to trust that reality will take care of the rest. There is a profound freedom in this understanding. It allows you to let go of resentment, to release yourself from the burden of needing to see punishment, and to focus on your own growth. The best revenge, if you can even call it that, is to build a life so stable, so aligned with truth and meaning, that the harm done to you becomes insignificant in comparison to what you have created. That is real power. That is what it means to live in harmony with order. The human mind is a complex and deeply layered structure, shaped by both conscious choices and unconscious patterns. When a person engages in harmful actions, whether through deceit, betrayal, or malice, they are not only affecting the external world, but also reshaping their own psychological landscape. The consequences of wrongdoing are not always immediate or visible, but they are inevitable. The mind is not designed to exist in a perpetual state of conflict with reality, and when it does, it suffers. One of the first ways this suffering manifests is through cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when a person holds contradictory beliefs or behaves in ways that conflict with their own understanding of morality or truth. A person who hurts others often justifies their actions to themselves in order to maintain internal consistency. They tell themselves that they had no choice, that the other person deserved it, that the world is unfair, and they are simply playing by its rules. But deep down, the mind resists these justifications. It knows, on some level, that something is out of alignment. This dissonance creates internal tension, which leads to psychological distress. It may start small, an underlying sense of unease, a vague discomfort that lingers at the edges of awareness. But over time it grows. The more a person engages in harmful behavior, the more they must justify it, and the more they justify it, the further they detach from reality. This detachment leads to anxiety, paranoia, and an increasing inability to connect with others in a meaningful way. They begin to see threats where there are none, to project their own dishonesty onto the world, assuming that everyone around them is just as deceitful as they are. Another consequence of harmful behavior is the gradual erosion of self-respect. Every person has an innate sense of their own worth, which is built on their ability to act with integrity. When someone continuously chooses deception or malice, they chip away at their own self-picture. They may not acknowledge it openly, but deep down, they feel the weight of their own actions. This leads to self-loathing, which often manifests as aggression toward others and toward themselves. They may lash out, seeking to blame external forces for their unhappiness, or they may turn to self-destructive behaviors, numbing their inner turmoil with distractions, addictions, or reckless choices. Over time, these psychological effects become impossible to ignore. Relationships begin to suffer, as genuine connection requires trust, and trust cannot exist alongside manipulation. The mind, which seeks coherence and meaning, struggles under the burden of maintaining a false reality. This leads to exhaustion, mental, emotional, and even physical. Sleep disturbances, chronic stress, and a sense of perpetual dissatisfaction take hold. The person may attempt to silence their inner turmoil by doubling down on their behavior, but this only deepens the psychological damage. One of the most telling signs of this inner turmoil is an inability to experience true joy. When a person is in alignment with truth, they can experience deep, meaningful satisfaction from even simple things: friendship, work, creativity, love. But when someone is disconnected from truth, joy becomes fleeting, superficial, or entirely absent. They may chase pleasure through material wealth, power, or indulgence, but none of it truly satisfies. The more they seek external validation, the more hollow they feel. At the extreme end, prolonged engagement in harmful behavior can lead to a complete breakdown of identity. A person who has lived in deception for too long often loses any clear sense of who they are. They no longer recognize themselves because they have spent so much time pretending to be something they are not. This can result in severe psychological distress, including depression, anxiety disorders, and in some cases, full-blown existential crisis. The irony is that many people who harm others do so because they believe it will give them control over situations, over people, over outcomes. But in reality, it has the opposite effect. The more they try to manipulate the world around them, the less control they have over their own internal world. Their mind becomes a battleground, a place of constant tension and conflict. They are at war with reality, and reality always wins. The mind is wired for truth. It seeks coherence, meaning, and alignment with reality. When someone operates outside of these principles, they pay a price, not always immediately, but inevitably. This is why wrongdoing carries its own punishment, not as an external force, but as an internal unraveling. The more a person resists the truth, the more their mind fractures under the weight of that resistance. For those who have been wronged, understanding this psychological depth can bring a sense of peace. Justice is not always visible, but it is always at work. The person who caused harm may not show it outwardly, but internally they are dealing with consequences far greater than any external punishment could impose. The mind cannot escape itself, and in the end, no one truly gets away with anything. Objective truth exists whether we acknowledge it or not. It is independent of opinion, preference, or convenience. It is not something we create or manipulate. Rather, it is something we align ourselves with or suffer the consequences of rejecting. In every aspect of life, from the natural world to human relationships, truth operates as a fundamental structure that shapes reality. When people act in ways that contradict truth, when they deceive, manipulate, or harm others, they are not just making unethical choices. They are setting themselves on a collision course with consequences that they cannot avoid. This assertion of truth takes many forms. One of the most immediate ways it manifests is through the deterioration of trust. Human relationships are built on trust, whether in friendships, families, or professional settings. When someone repeatedly violates truth by lying or manipulating, people begin to recognize the pattern. It may not happen instantly, but over time their actions become evident and trust is eroded. And once trust is broken, it is incredibly difficult to rebuild. The person who chose deceit may believe they have won in the short term, but in the long run, they isolate themselves from meaningful connections. The consequence of rejecting truth is loneliness, suspicion, and ultimately exclusion from the very relationships they might have once valued. Another consequence of disregarding truth is the way it shapes a person's own perception of reality. A person who constantly engages in falsehoods must also lie to themselves to maintain the illusion that their actions are justified. This creates a fragmented mind, one that is no longer fully in touch with reality. They begin to see threats where there are none, to assume others are as dishonest as they are, and to live in a constant state of paranoia. They cannot experience true peace because their own mind is a battlefield, torn between the truth they refuse to accept and the deception they try to sustain. This self-inflicted psychological damage is unavoidable because truth is not just an external principle, it is also deeply embedded within human nature. People are wired to seek meaning, coherence, and alignment with reality. When someone consistently chooses to oppose truth, their mind resists. This resistance often manifests as anxiety, depression, and an increasing sense of emptiness. No amount of success, material gain, or external validation can compensate for the internal chaos that results from living in contradiction to reality. Furthermore, rejecting truth has consequences beyond the individual. Societies that abandon truth, whether in politics, justice, or cultural values, eventually collapse under their own weight. Corruption, deception, and manipulation may provide temporary advantages, but they create instability that eventually leads to failure. History has repeatedly shown that civilizations that disregard truth eventually crumble, not because of external enemies, but because of the rot that spreads from within. The same principle applies at an individual level. A person who builds their life on lies will eventually watch it fall apart, not necessarily because of direct punishment, but because a structure built on falsehood cannot stand indefinitely. One of the most powerful examples of this principle is how wrongdoing often leads to unintended consequences. People who act in bad faith may believe they are in control, that they can predict and manipulate outcomes. But the reality is that no one can account for all the variables that shape the world. The consequences of deceit and harm often manifest in ways the wrongdoer never anticipated. Lost opportunities, betrayals from their own allies, unexpected setbacks, or simply the slow unraveling of the stability they once took for granted. For those who have been wronged, understanding the nature of objective truth and consequences can be liberating. It removes the burden of seeking revenge or obsessing over whether justice will be served. Reality itself ensures justice, not always in ways we expect or on the timeline we desire, but inevitably, those who violate truth will face its consequences, not necessarily because someone enforces them, but because reality itself does not support deception indefinitely. The key, then, is not to allow yourself to be consumed by the injustice of the moment. Trust that truth is at work, shaping outcomes in ways you may not immediately see. Your responsibility is to remain aligned with truth yourself, to act with integrity, to refuse to lower yourself to the level of those who harm you, and to focus on building a life that is stable, meaningful, and rooted in reality. Those who live according to truth do not need to fear consequences because truth itself sustains them. But those who reject it, no matter how powerful they seem in the moment, are always on borrowed time. Resentment is one of the most corrosive emotions a person can carry. It arises when we feel wronged, betrayed, or treated unfairly, and it lingers when we believe that justice has not been served. At first, resentment can feel justified. It gives us a sense of control, a belief that by holding on to our anger, we are somehow keeping the wrongdoer accountable. But in reality, resentment does not punish the one who harmed us. It punishes us. It becomes a chain tying us to the very pain we want to escape. True freedom comes not when the wrongdoer suffers, but when we release the burden of needing to see them suffer. One of the greatest misunderstandings about letting go of resentment is the belief that it means excusing or forgetting what happened. It does not. Freedom from resentment is not about pretending that injustice did not occur. It is about refusing to let that injustice define you. When you hold on to resentment, you allow the person who harmed you to continue occupying space in your mind. They may have wronged you once, but by clinging to bitterness, you allow them to wrong you repeatedly in your thoughts. They no longer need to be present to hurt you. Your own mind does it for them. Psychologically, resentment is exhausting. It requires energy to maintain. It keeps you in a state of constant tension, reliving past wrongs, replaying conversations, and imagining scenarios where justice is served in a way that satisfies your anger. This drains your emotional resources, leaving you less able to focus on your own growth, happiness, and peace. It keeps you stuck in the past, unable to move forward. Letting go of resentment does not mean allowing the person to escape accountability. Rather, it means trusting that reality itself will hold them accountable. People who act dishonestly or cruelly set themselves up for inevitable consequences. Their own minds will turn against them, their relationships will suffer, and the world will respond to their actions in ways they cannot predict. But you do not have to be the one to ensure this happens. That is not your burden to carry. Justice is built into the structure of reality, and it unfolds whether you witness it or not. A powerful way to release resentment is to shift your focus from what was taken from you to what you can build. The best revenge, if you want to call it that, is not destruction but creation. It is not in tearing down the person who hurt you, but in building a life so full, so meaningful that their actions become irrelevant. When you focus on your own purpose, growth, and well-being, you reclaim the power that resentment would otherwise steal from you. This does not mean you will never feel anger or frustration. Those emotions are natural responses to being wronged, but the key is to let them move through you rather than allowing them to take root. Anger is a signal that something is wrong, but it is not meant to be a permanent state. Use it as fuel for change, whether that means setting better boundaries, learning from the experience, or channeling your energy into something productive. Many people resist letting go of resentment because they believe it means giving up their right to justice. But true justice does not require your suffering. It does not demand that you hold on to pain indefinitely. In fact, the more you let go of resentment, the more clearly you can see the path forward. You are no longer clouded by bitterness or revenge. Instead, you can make decisions that are rooted in wisdom, strength, and clarity. The final step in freeing yourself from resentment is acceptance. Not acceptance in the sense of approving what happened, but acceptance in the sense of recognizing that you cannot change the past. What has been done cannot be undone, but what you do next is entirely within your control. Will you allow yourself to remain trapped in the emotions of the past, or will you choose to move forward? Freedom from resentment is a gift you give yourself. It is the act of saying, I will not let what happened to me dictate my future. It is choosing to step out of the shadow of pain and into the light of possibility. The world is full of people who have suffered injustices, but have refused to let those injustices define them. They have chosen to build, to grow, to heal. That choice is available to you too. And when you make it, you step into a life where the past no longer has control over you. You become free. Reality is not random. It follows patterns, predictable, structured, and deeply embedded in the very fabric of existence. These patterns govern everything from the physical laws that shape the universe to the psychological and social dynamics that influence human behavior. Recognizing these patterns is crucial because it allows us to align ourselves with reality rather than struggle against it. Those who understand the fundamental structures of reality thrive, while those who ignore or resist them inevitably face consequences. One of the most profound patterns in reality is the relationship between order and chaos. Order represents structure, stability, and predictability. It is the foundation of civilization, law, morality, and personal responsibility. Chaos, on the other hand, is unpredictability, uncertainty, and destruction. Neither is inherently good or bad. Both are necessary. Too much order leads to rigidity and stagnation, while too much chaos leads to instability and suffering. Life is a constant negotiation between these forces, and success comes from learning how to balance them. People who engage in wrongdoing, whether through deception, manipulation, or harm, disrupt this balance. They introduce unnecessary chaos into their own lives and the lives of those around them. But reality has a way of restoring order. Those who act unethically often believe they can control the outcomes of their actions, but they fail to recognize the patterns that govern human relationships, trust, and personal stability. Lies require more lies to sustain them. Betrayal leads to isolation. Manipulation breeds resentment. The structure of reality ensures that these behaviors, over time, lead to downfall. One of the clearest patterns in reality is that truth leads to stability while falsehood leads to instability. When a person aligns themselves with truth by acting with integrity, taking responsibility, and facing reality as it is, they create a solid foundation for their life. Their relationships are stronger because they are built on trust. Their decisions are clearer because they are based on reality rather than illusion. Their mind is at peace because they are not constantly trying to maintain a false narrative. In contrast, those who reject truth create instability for themselves. A dishonest person must always keep track of their lies. They must constantly adjust their behavior to avoid being exposed. They live in a state of paranoia, always fearing that the truth will surface. Over time, this erodes their confidence, their peace of mind, and their relationships. The pattern is inevitable. Deception may work in the short term, but in the long run, it collapses under its own weight. Another fundamental pattern is that actions have consequences, even if they are not immediate. Many people believe they can escape the repercussions of their behavior simply because they do not experience them right away. But reality does not operate on a human timeline. Just as planting a seed does not yield fruit overnight, the consequences of one's actions often take time to manifest. But they do. Harmful actions accumulate damage, not just in the external world, but within the person who commits them. Their mental and emotional state deteriorates, their relationships suffer, their ability to trust others diminishes. The world responds to them with increasing hostility. This principle also works in the positive direction. Small, consistent acts of integrity, responsibility, and effort compound over time. A person who makes disciplined, honest choices day after day will find themselves in a far better position in the future than someone who seeks shortcuts or avoids responsibility. This is why people who dedicate themselves to truth, hard work, and ethical behavior tend to rise over time, while those who cut corners, lie, or act destructively tend to fall. The patterns of reality do not just govern individuals, they govern societies. Civilizations that uphold truth, responsibility, and moral structure thrive, while those that abandon these principles decay. Corrupt societies may appear to succeed for a time, but eventually the instability they create leads to collapse. History is filled with examples of empires and institutions that rose and fell based on whether they adhered to or violated fundamental truths about human nature and morality. Understanding these patterns is liberating. It means that we do not need to rely on wishful thinking or blind faith to navigate life. We can observe how reality works and make choices accordingly. If we act in alignment with truth, if we take responsibility for our actions, if we strive to balance order and chaos in a meaningful way, we set ourselves up for long-term success. If we ignore these principles, we set ourselves up for failure. Perhaps the most important realization is that reality does not bend to our desires. It is not shaped by what we wish were true, but by what is true. The sooner we accept this and adjust our lives accordingly, the more control we actually gain. We stop living in delusion. We stop making decisions based on short-term emotions. We stop fighting against the structure of existence and instead learn how to work with it. The patterns of reality are not hidden. They are everywhere in the laws of nature, in the rise and fall of civilizations, and the successes and failures of individuals. They are predictable, consistent, and unforgiving to those who ignore them. But for those who understand and respect them, they provide a path to stability, meaning, and strength. Reality is not random. It is structured, and within that structure lies the key to a well-lived life. Faith and rationality are often presented as opposing forces, one rooted in belief, the other in reason. This false dichotomy has led many to believe that one must choose between the two, that faith requires the abandonment of logic, or that rationality necessitates the rejection of belief in things beyond empirical proof. But the truth is far more complex. Faith and rationality are not enemies. They are complementary. Each plays a crucial role in human understanding, and when properly balanced, they provide a framework for navigating life with both wisdom and purpose. Rationality is essential for structuring our thoughts, making decisions, and understanding the world. It allows us to analyze evidence, discern patterns, and predict consequences. It helps us build societies, create technologies, and develop systems of justice. Rational thinking is what enables us to test ideas, question assumptions, and refine our understanding of reality over time. Without it, we would be at the mercy of superstition, impulsivity, and blind adherence to tradition. However, rationality alone has limitations. It deals with what can be measured, tested, and logically deduced, but not everything that matters in life can be quantified, meaning purpose, morality, and love. These are not strictly rational concepts. They exist in the realm of experience, intuition, and belief. This is where faith enters. Faith is not simply the acceptance of religious doctrine. It is the deep trust in things that cannot be fully proven, but are nonetheless essential for a meaningful life. Every human being exercises faith in some form. The scientist has faith in the intelligibility of the universe, believing that nature operates in consistent ways that can be studied and understood. The parent has faith that their sacrifices for their children will lead to a better future. The entrepreneur has faith that their effort and risk will result in success. Even the most secular individual has faith in concepts like justice, human dignity, and truth, none of which can be fully proven by empirical methods, yet they serve as foundational beliefs for human civilization. Faith gives people the courage to act even when the outcome is uncertain. Rationality might tell a person what is possible, but faith is what drives them to take the leap. A purely rational mindset without faith can lead to paralysis. If one only ever acts on absolute certainty, they may never take meaningful risks, never pursue dreams, never step into the unknown. Some of the greatest achievements in history, scientific discoveries, artistic masterpieces, social movements, were driven by individuals who believed in something beyond immediate proof. At the same time, faith without rationality can lead to dangerous territory. When belief is disconnected from reason, it can become blind fanaticism, superstition, or ideological rigidity. History is filled with examples of people who, in their certainty, abandoned reason and committed great harm. Rationality serves as a necessary check on faith, ensuring that beliefs align with reality and do not become detached from truth. A healthy balance between faith and rationality creates a powerful approach to life. It allows for both the pursuit of knowledge and the embrace of mystery. It enables a person to seek truth rigorously while also accepting that not all answers can be immediately known. This balance is particularly important in moral and ethical decision-making. Rationality helps assess the consequences of actions, but faith provides the deeper motivation for why one should act morally in the first place. Consider, for example, the belief in human rights. Rationally, one might argue that human rights are a social construct, an agreement among societies to treat people with dignity. But why should human rights matter at all? Why should we believe that every person has inherent value? This belief is fundamentally an act of faith. Faith in the intrinsic worth of human beings. Faith that morality is not just a survival mechanism, but a reflection of deeper truth. Faith and rationality together also help people endure suffering. Rational analysis can explain why hardship occurs. It can point to cause and effect, historical context, and personal choices. But rationality alone cannot provide comfort or hope in the face of deep pain. Faith allows a person to endure suffering with the belief that there is meaning beyond the suffering itself. Whether it is faith in God, in the redemptive power of struggle, or in the eventual triumph of good over evil, this belief is what prevents despair.